Hi there, Dave here. Today I'm going to be changing a computer case. So I'm going to be taking all of the insides of this computer out and installing it into this computer case here. This is a Corsair 200R case, which I'll show you around a bit later on. Now, if your power supply has an on-off switch, then switch it to the off position and ground yourself as well before you get started. So let's take the side of this case off. Now, all cases vary a little, so you can start wherever you like, whatever's easiest to take out first, start with that. And looking inside this case, it looks like the easiest thing to start with is the graphics card, so I'll take that out first. Now, just before I take this graphics card out, you can see I've got a case fan here with its wires coming down and it's connected to the motherboard. So I'm just going to take this connector out because it's slightly in the way of the graphics card. Just move it out of the way. Now, this graphics card has a power connector connected to it, so I'm just going to pull this out. Now, not all graphics cards have a power connector. Some do, some have one, some have two. And when you're pulling a power connector out, you can see it has a clip just here to release it. So make sure you press this before you pull the power connector out. Okay, so this is held in by one screw. Some of them are held in by two. And also, it's this graphics card is held in by a clip just here. You just see that white clip. So try not to lose the screw here. And you can press that clip down and that will release the lock on that side of the graphics card, and then you can wriggle the graphics card out. I'm slightly pushing on it from the edge of the case and I can feel that lock has unlocked, and can take the graphics card out. Now make sure you hold the graphics card by its edges. You don't really want to be touching any of its circuit board. Okay, so next I'm going to take out the power supply. Now, this power supply has cables leading from it to various components, so we need to take out any of these power connectors first. So this is often connected to a DVD drive, a hard drive, a motherboard using a 20 or 24 pin power connector, and quite often there's another connector onto the motherboard, which is often a 8 pin or a 4 pin power connector. So any cables that lead from the power supply to a component, let's just take those out. So each one that you take out, it has these little clips on. Most of them do have these clips, so you need to press the clip again to release each power connector. So that's one of them from the motherboard, and take out another one from the DVD drive and one from the hard drive. And once you've taken out all of the cables that lead from the power supply to any components, you can then take out the power supply. So I've now taken out all of the power supply's power connectors out. As you can see, it's all ready to come out now. So the power supply quite often has 4 screws holding it in place at the back. And we can just unscrew each one to take the power supply out. Now, If yours is like mine, where the power supply is at the top of the case, then you'll need to hold the power supply as you're unscrewing it, or you could do this whilst the computer case is on its side, which will actually make it a bit easier that way. Okay, so that's the power supply unscrewed from the case, and now I can take the power supply out of the case, like so. So now I'm going to take the hard drive out. So this has an SATA cable plugged into the back of it, so I'll just pull this cable out, and the other side of this cable is plugged into the motherboard, so I'll just pull it out of the motherboard here. And one trick, if you're not particularly used to this kind of thing, you can mark each cable for its orientation and where it plugs into with a bit of masking tape. Other people I know have taken a photograph of their computer so that they know where everything goes when it's time to reassemble everything. Okay, so this particular case, you can pull these clips in. It has a clip on either side, and you pull the clip in so that you can then pull the hard drive out. You can hear it unclips there. Now, we couldn't take this out at first because the graphics card was in the way, which isn't the case with every computer case, but that's the hard drive taken out. Now, the hard drive in your case might come out slightly different to this one. Some of them have slots. Instead of being side on, they have slots at the front where you can pull the hard drive straight out this way, in which case you'll need to take the back panel off first so that you can disconnect its cables first. So here at the back of the DVD drive we have this SATA cable which we can pull straight out, and the other end of this SATA cable is here plugged into the motherboard, so we'll just pull that out. Now, just here on the motherboard we have these case cables. These are cables that lead from the front of the case to here on the motherboard. Often these are around the bottom of the motherboard, plugged in down there somewhere. On this particular motherboard it's halfway up. And so we need to pull these out. That's the hard drive LED cable connector, and here we have a reset switch, and the last one here is the power switch. So as I mentioned before, you may want to make a note of where these were plugged into on the motherboard. This will help for reassembling them later on. So if we open up the door on this case and we want to take the DVD drive out. Now, we've already taken out the cables from the back of the DVD drive, and on this case in particular we can turn this dial here. This is what holds the DVD drive in on this case. We just push the DVD drive from the back and it should pull straight out of the case like that. Now, the DVD drive that you have in your case, or your Blu-ray drive or CD-ROM, whatever it is you have in place here, yours may come out slightly different to mine. Some of them have a screw just on this side, so you unscrew it and slide it out, or it may have a screw on both sides, or some kind of clip holding it in place, or it might have both. So I also have a power splitter here at the bottom of the case, which may come in handy for the new case. So just pull these apart like that and like that. Now, not all cases have these, some do, some don't, but it may come in handy if you need it for your new case. So I'll put that to one side. And now, all that's left to take out is the motherboard. Now for this I'm going to lie the computer case on its side. Now these motherboards quite often have around 6 to 8 screws. In this one we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to take each of the screws out first. And now we can just lift the motherboard out of the case. Now this metal plate just here is called the I/O plate. This is for the motherboard. So we need this plate, so we'll just pop it through. And there's the plate out. Okay, so now we've taken all of the parts outside of this computer case, we can now take our new computer case and start installing the parts into it. So here's the new case we're going to be using. It's, as I mentioned before, it's the Corsair 200R case, and I'll just show you around it a little bit. We have the power on-off switch and reset switch, 2 USB 3.0 ports and headphone and microphone port, and I'll show you inside of the case. Now this isn't a review of the case, I'm just going to show you the main parts of the case so that you're familiar with what we're using here. So I'll just take these thumb screws, which is always handy on the case. Just take the side panel off here. So just here we have 4 slots for 3.5-inch hard disk drives and 4 slots up here for solid state drives. And we have a fan at the front and a fan at the back, plenty of space for the motherboard, and we have these cables here, such as this one. This is a cable that leads from the USB ports on the front, and this will be connected to the motherboard. And we have these case cables that also lead from the front, such as the power button and the reset button. Those will be plugged into the motherboard as well. And here we have the connector for this fan, and the front fan also has a connector here. Both of those will be connected to the motherboard, and just in here we have the case screws as well. So let's start with installing the motherboard. Now, as you can see inside this new case, we have these standoffs that the motherboard will sit on. Now, most cases have these standoffs, which should line up with the screw holes in the motherboard. Now, if we take our motherboard, you can see these screw holes all around the board. Now, if I just put the motherboard down, if you have one of these standoffs and it doesn't line up with the screw hole in the motherboard, then you have to take the standoff out. You don't want one of these standoffs sitting on the back of the motherboard and shorting out the motherboard. So make sure that wherever there's a standoff, it lines up with the screw holes in your motherboard. Now I've just lined up my motherboard with the standoffs in the case, and I can see that there is a screw hole in the motherboard for all of these except for this one, so I have to take this one out. These just simply screw out of the case, so let's unscrew that now, take this one out. So now let's put the motherboard's I/O plate into place in the new case. Make sure it's the right way up and the right way round. Let's put it into place and it just clicks into place. So just give it a push all around the edges. That's it. So now we can install the motherboard into the case. We can line up these side motherboard ports with the motherboard's I/O plate that we've just installed. So we line that up with the back of the case and also line up the screw holes with the motherboard. Now as I put the motherboard down, there's a standoff just here that sticks through a screw hole in the motherboard. So we don't need to put a screw there, that can be left as it is. This Corsair case came with these screws in this box inside the case. So I'm going to use these screws. So as you can see on this motherboard, there's a screw hole here, 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 here. There's one there, one up in the corner, and there's one there, one there and one there. So we're going to put a screw in each of the screw holes so that the motherboard can be held into place. Now just before you start screwing your motherboard down, just make sure that any cables like this are not trapped behind the motherboard. The best way to put the screws in is to just half screw all of the screws into the board, and then once you've got all the screws in, you can go ahead and finish tightening up the screws. Now, you don't want to make the screws too tight, just tight enough so that they're firmly holding the motherboard into place. So now let's plug the hard drive in. Now this hard drive, when it was in the old case, it came with these side brackets. Now this case doesn't use the side brackets, so we can take these off. Just pull them off if yours has any like that. And we want the SATA connections on this hard disk drive to be facing the back of the case. So make sure those connections are facing the back if you're using a case like this one. And we can just put it in and slide it into place. Now there is a locking mechanism just on the side here, which I'll hold that out. Let's turn the case so you can see it better. That's this just here I'm holding out, and slide the hard drive into place, and there it's clicked into place. So now let's put in the DVD drive. Now this will go into any of these three bays here, and just put my hand behind this top bay, push it, and it just pops out. Some of these will come out in different cases with a small tab behind one of these plates, and you just pull it in and push this out. And once you've done that, make sure the DVD drive is the right way up and slide it into place. Now this case in particular has this tab just here. Just pull it out slightly, make sure the DVD drive is flush in the case, and then lock it into place with this tab here. Now there are screw holes just here, so you could screw this into place as well, but generally this is quite secure even without the screws, so that's just optional. And there is another screw hole on the other side of the DVD drive which you can use, but again it's optional. So here at the back of the computer case you can see there's a gap all the way around, so that when the back panel is put back on we still have this gap for certain cables that can be threaded through these holes. This is good for cable management. So to show you an example of this, here we have the front case fan and its cable with its connector on the end, and we can thread this round the back and then pull it back in through this hole, ready to be plugged into here on the motherboard. Now when you plug in these fan connectors you can see that one side looks slightly different to the other. Now it's this side that you want to plug onto this side of the connector. So this side plugs in where the tab is, just here, this white tab. So let's plug that in now. And I've done the same for the case fan on the back of the case. I've plugged it into the motherboard just as I did with the front case fan. So now I'm going to install the graphics card back into the case. Now if you take a look at the back of your case, it will have these metal strips held in by screws. Some of these strips on certain cases you just have to break them out, it has no screw, and some have clips just here instead of screws. Now we want to install the graphics card into this slot here, so if your computer does have a graphics card, not all do, just line it up with the slot that it will be going into, and then you can see which one of these on the left you need to take out. So for this graphics card I can see I'll need to take out this one and this one. So I'm just going to unscrew those. And can pull this metal strip out like that. So now I've taken out these 3 metal strips, I can install the graphics card. Just line it up with the slot, just as it was before in the old case. Just line it up and push it in. And as I was mentioning earlier, it has a lock on this particular motherboard, and I could hear that lock into place. Now I just need to screw the graphics card in on this left side here. So now I have the graphics card screwed into place. I can see that this third strip of metal didn't need to come out. So I'm going to put that back in and screw it into place. Now this audio cable is what's connecting the front audio ports on the front of the case, the microphone and headphone port, to this audio connector here. And this connector needs to be plugged in on the header on the motherboard just down here for this particular motherboard. So I'm going to feed this wire out of the back of the case, and this is what I was talking about earlier about cable management, putting the wires around the back of the case, and then I can feed it back through here and plug it into this audio header just here. So now you can see a close-up of this audio header. You can see it has a pin missing just here, and the audio connector has a blocked hole just here on the right, and that blocked hole needs to be lined up with the missing pin on the connector. So let's plug that in. This audio connector is an HD audio connector, and the header on the motherboard is also HD audio. So these can be connected together just fine. But if you find that you have, let's say, an HD audio connector leading from the connector to the front of the case, but your motherboard only has an AC97 header on the motherboard, then you'll need to use a converter cable to connect the two up. And now for this USB cable. This cable leads from the two USB ports on the front of this case to this USB connector here, and I'm going to thread this cable through the back of the case. So just pull it out through here, and the USB port on this case, on this motherboard, is just down here on this particular motherboard. So I'll thread this back through this hole here. So here's a close-up of those USB headers on this particular motherboard, but these headers are USB 2 headers, and the front of this case has USB 3 ports, so we need to use a converter cable. So here we have the converter cable that converts front USB ports on the front of the case, USB 3, to USB 2 header on the motherboard. And just here we have the case cable that leads from the front of the case to this connector, and as you can see there's a little plastic piece here that will fit into the converter cable just there. And also on this converter cable you can see there's a pin missing, and sometimes on this one here the pin is blocked, which you have to line up. So let's plug that in now. So now I'm going to plug this USB 2 connector into the motherboard just here, into the USB header, and as you can see on this there's a blocked hole just here, and that needs to line up with the blocked hole on the USB header. Now these are both USB 2 headers on this motherboard, so I can plug this into either one. Just line up blocked hole with the missing pin and slide it in. Now I need to connect my front panel connectors just here on this header on the motherboard. Now this is the power switch connector that leads from the front power switch to this connector, and on the other side you can just see there's an arrow on the top left of this connector, and that indicates the plus side of this connector. Sometimes they write a cross on this side of the connector to show the positive side, but there should be some kind of marking on it so that you know which side is which. Once you know which side is which, hopefully you've written down or made some kind of note of how your connectors were plugged in before, so then you can just go ahead and plug them in as they were. These connectors just slide onto the pins. Now, when I was dealing with these connectors on the original case, it had the power LED block was all in one, so it's kind of like that, all in one, whereas this one's separate, but it doesn't make any difference. Just make sure you get the positive and negative the right way round onto these connectors as it was before. So now I'm going to install the power supply into the case. This power supply on this particular case will go just here. In most cases you either install the power supply up the top here at the back of the case, or just here at the bottom of the case at the back. Now, most of these power supplies have a fan at the bottom, so I'll be installing mine this way up with the fan at the bottom. Generally, if you're installing this at the bottom, you'll have the fan facing down. But if your case is going to be on a thick carpet, you may want to consider installing the power supply with the fan facing upwards to make sure that fan gets plenty of air. And if you're installing the power supply at the top, generally speaking, you'll have the fan facing downwards. Something that I've just noticed is that this connector that I installed earlier, its cable will actually get in the way of the power supply. So I'm going to take this connector out, just pull this out, and I'm going to thread it back through this hole and into this one instead, and above this metal piece just here, and reattach it into the header there. So now I can install the power supply into the case. As I mentioned, fan facing downwards. And let's move the cables a bit there. And now we've moved that cable, it fits just fine. And push it up to the back of the case, and it has 4 screw holes at the back of the case where you can secure this power supply into place. So when you're screwing the power supply in, it's best to half screw the screws in and then afterwards just go around tightening them up. So now I'm going to install the SATA cables, and on this particular motherboard they can fit into these SATA ports here, or as some people call them, SATA ports. And notice in the middle of each one there's like an L shape of plastic, and this will line up with the hole in each SATA connector. So just line that up and it just plugs straight into the motherboard. Now I'll plug in the second one, again making sure you plug it in the right way round. That's it. This orange SATA cable needs to be plugged into the back of the hard drive. Now, because the back of the hard drive is over here in this case, I'll thread through this SATA cable ready to be plugged in to the back of the hard drive. And here at the back of the case we can see where the SATA cable needs to be plugged in at the back of the hard drive. So again, make sure you plug it in the right way round, just line it up and plug it straight in. Now to plug in the red SATA cable. Now this plugs into the back of the DVD drive just here. Now just to make the cables a bit tidier, I'm going to thread this cable through this hole and back in through here, and this can be plugged in just here at the back of the DVD drive. It can be plugged straight in. Again, make sure you plug it in the right way round and just slot it straight in. Now I just mentioned that not all cases have all these holes for cable management. Just like my old case, some of them just have a solid back, which means that all the cables have to stay in the front. If you do have holes like these for cable management, it does make the computer look a lot more tidy. Now we can plug in the power supply power connectors. Now here we have an SATA power connector which can be used for the hard drive, and we have another SATA power connector which can be used for the DVD drive, and here we have a 6-pin power connector for the graphics card, and we have a 24-pin power connector which will be plugged in just here on the motherboard, and here we have an 8-pin power connector which will be plugged in just up here on the motherboard. So I'll plug in the 24-pin power connector now. Some of the older computers have a 20-pin power connector. So they all have, or most of them have, a clip on the side which will hold on to this piece here, this piece of plastic that's sticking out. That will hold it into place. So you just plug it straight in. Now I'm going to plug this 8-pin power connector into this 8-pin port on the motherboard, and as you can see on the top of the port it has that line of plastic, and this clip on the side of this 8-pin power connector will clip onto it. And there you hear it clicks into place. Now I'm going to plug in power for the graphics card. This is the graphics card's 6-pin power port, and as you can see there's a tab just here at the bottom of it, and this clip will clip onto it to hold it into place. Just plug that in. Now these connectors that lead from the power supply and plug into the graphics card, they will be labelled, like this one is labelled PCI Express, or it may be written on the connector itself something like PCIe, but it will be clearly labelled which ones are supposed to be used for the graphics card. Next, I want to give power to the DVD drive and the hard drive. Now this cable here and this one here are both SATA power connectors, so I'm going to thread both of them through the back here. This one could be used for the hard drive, although it doesn't matter which one you use when it comes to SATA power connectors. And let's get this other one threaded through the other SATA power connector. Now I'm going to push back through this SATA power connector ready to power the DVD drive. Now I'm just going to take out its data cable for a moment, just so that you can clearly see what I'm doing here. And these SATA power connectors will only go one way. As you can see, there's like an L-shaped piece of plastic in the middle of the power port, which lines up with this power connector. So I'll just go ahead and plug that in now. And let's put that SATA data cable back in as well. Now I use the other SATA power connector to power up the hard drive. I'll just take its data cable out so you can see clearly what I'm doing. And again, as you can see, this plastic L shape needs to fit this. So it only goes in one way. So let's plug that in. Make sure it's firmly in place, and let's put in the data cable again. Here at the back of the case, I've just tied most of the cables together with one zip tie, which actually these zip ties came with a case, so it's quite handy. Now you need to know whether the back panel will actually fit on once you've done this. I think I've made them flat enough now to be able to put the back panel on. You can actually leave them bulging out so much that the back panel doesn't fit on. So let's see what we've got here. That's it, back panel fits on, so that's fine. Now we can screw the back panel on with these two thumb screws here. That's one. And two. Now we can put the side panel back on because everything's been installed. Everything has power that needs power. So that just leaves putting the side panel back on. And I'll just put these two last thumb screws in. Now obviously when you're changing your computer cases vary, as I mentioned earlier, so yours may be done slightly different to how I've done mine, but generally they're fairly similar, especially if you've written down which cables went where before you do anything at all. That way it'll make the job very easy. Okay, so that's how to change a computer case. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. See you next time.